Good afternoon, and thank you for taking time away from your families and businesses to join us for this Epic Insight. This is Brian Lenz, Director of Sales and Strategic Partnerships here at Epic Retirement Plan Services, and I'll be your host for today's call. We're joined by Ryan Tiernan of Capital Group for a glimpse into the future of FinTech and to offer some suggestions on how you might leverage it to propel your practices. Ryan is a Senior National Accounts Manager at Capital Group, home of American Funds. He has 19 years of industry experience and has been with Capital Group for 3 years. Prior to joining Capital, he founded Access Point HSA, and he holds a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst and holds the AIF and CIMA designations. As always, you will be muted throughout the call, but if you have any questions you'd like me to run by Ryan at the end of the session, enter those in the questions panel, and I'll throw them his way. With that, we'll turn it over to Ryan.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian, and thank you for having us today. I appreciate it as well as all my counterparts at the Capital Group and the American Funds. So what we're going to talk about today in the next 25 to 30 minutes is really all things FinTech. And just before the call, Brian and I were catching up on how this topic continues to evolve, and more and more, it seems like every day there are ideas and stories coming out about this evolution of technology. And a lot of it, what we're going to talk about, you're seeing on a daily basis. But really, we're going to look at it through the lens of how it's impacting not only financial services, but for those of you working with employers and employees in particular, how is the technology impacting them, right? The way they hire, the way they work, the way they retire. So in an effort to cover quite a bit in a short period of time, let's go ahead and get started. But instead of kicking it off and getting right into the newest kind of cutting edge in technology, we're actually going to go back in time a little bit and talk about the game of Go. Go is the longest actively played board game in the world. It's over 2,500 years old. And what's amazing about Go is that even though it looks extremely simplistic, in the fact that it's got black pieces, white pieces, and a 19-inch by 19-inch board of squares, it's actually anything but simplistic. In fact, there are more potential configurations of that Go board than atoms in the universe. And when we think about this, how difficult is the game of Go maybe compared to some of the games that we know are very difficult, like say chess? Well, even chess champions will tell you that if there is intelligent life beyond us in the universe, they're most likely playing Go and not chess. But when we think about kind of these board games, we do like to think about how do humans get good at a game like Go or a game like chess? Well, it's really their ability to think kind of 5 or 6 moves ahead. If you think about how the best chess players play, it is that ability to kind of be where they need to be 3, 4, and 5, 6 moves ahead. And what's interesting about this dichotomy between Go and chess is that Go takes an extremely different angle in that you have to be much more creative to be that much better at Go. So there's an element of creativity that to date has really kept computers out of Go championships and Go tournaments. I think probably a lot of us remember it was 1997 when Garry Kasparov lost to IBM's Deep Blue, right? The idea that a computer could beat a human in the game of chess, right? That's kind of been there and done that. But as it relates to Go, only recently have computers been able to compete with humans in the game of Go. And they get really good, not by thinking 5 or 6 moves ahead, but thanks to things like artificial intelligence, they're able to think 50 to 60 moves ahead. In particular, a program called AlphaGo actually beat our best human champion 4 games to 1. And when they got together to talk about how this computer did, all the best Go players in the world used terms like creative and beautiful, not to describe the moves that the human was making, but actually to describe the moves that the computer was making. And in fact, computer playing moves that only had a 1 in 10,000 chance of being played by a human that ultimately led to the computer, beating what we knew of at the time as the best Go player in the world. And we use this kind of short story as a springboard into how fast technology is changing, how we use technology, and how going forward it's going to impact pretty much every part of our daily lives, and in particular, financial services. And that's really the jumping off point to this future of FinTech. So really what we're going to cover today is this technology disruption. What are 3 technologies that we think are going to be incredibly important going forward? We're going to talk about the future of finance. Where are these technologies manifesting themselves in financial services? And then finally, the holographic advisor, right? So how do these things impact your role as a private wealth advisor, as a TPA, as a defined contribution advisor? So with that, let's get into kind of what we think is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest and most impactful technologies. It's artificial intelligence. And said simply, AI are computers that can learn on their own. But what's interesting about AI is that it's not necessarily a new technology. In fact, AI as a term has been around since 1955. What is new about AI, however, is not only the speed at which computers can crunch data, but also the amount of data that they have. And using artificial intelligence, again, computers that can learn on their own, we're changing how we actually interact with computers. We're using things like NLP or natural language processing. This idea that software can actually understand and use natural human speech. For any of us that have said, hey Siri or hey Alexa, right, this idea that a computer can speak English or any other human language is thanks to something called natural language processing, brought to you by artificial intelligence. And the other is NUI or natural user interface. And computers with a camera and some sense technology and this AI enablement can actually read human gestures. And in fact, we can give presentations now without clickers, but just by using our hands to motion slides forward and backwards. And how we interact is changing even more as we go forward, thanks to this kind of Internet of Things. And you'd actually argue it's how we're not interacting with our computers that becomes important here. And if we were to define this kind of Internet of Things, it'd be the embedding of wireless internet connections into traditionally dumb objects and allowing them to exchange data. And what do we mean by this? Well, we've heard stories about how your refrigerator can now sense that you are low on milk and reach out to Amazon to order more milk or more groceries. And really what they've done is taken you, the human, out of that conversation. You know, one of my favorite stories around the Internet of Things gone right and gone wrong is for all of us wearing an Apple Watch. An advisor down in Florida that we met with not too long ago had a wife who was a finalist for Teacher of the Year. And to make sure that she was, you know, kind of on point and within her time frame, she bought an Apple Watch so that when she was presenting to her class, but in front of a group of senior teachers, she wouldn't go over time. So she put the Apple Watch on her hand, and for better or worse, the watch, sensing her heart rate and blood pressure, actually called an ambulance for her. She was so nervous about presenting in front of these senior teachers that the watch, basically unbeknownst to her, called an ambulance. Now, if she was really having a heart attack, that would have been a fantastic thing. But unfortunately, she was just terribly embarrassed. But it speaks to this idea that our watches, our toasters, our refrigerators can now actually cut us out of the loop and talk to other quote unquote smart machines, is something that we need to be, number one, aware of and figure out really how to use to our best interest. Now, moving away from artificial intelligence, we think another big technology that's going to impact all of us, whether we're in financial services or not, is this idea of blockchain, or what they call the Internet of Value. It's essentially the ability to interact in a commercial way and exchange data is really the root cause of blockchain. And I want to be clear here, when we talk about blockchain, we're not talking about cryptocurrency. And to be clear, it's actually the underlying functionality of blockchain, right? The lattice work or the framework of blockchain that allows cryptocurrencies to exist. But it's the blockchain technology itself that we are most interested in. And to be totally clear, for all of us in the retirement landscape, blockchain is a record-keeping technology. And what do we mean by that? Well, simply put, what you've got is a peer-to-peer transaction. So again, two people exchanging value. That peer-to-peer transaction is decentralized and verified. So no longer do you need a custodian or a third party or an escrow account, right? The decentralized nature of my transaction is being verified not just by one other third party, but by a network of third parties. And all those transactions are timestamped with a digital signature. And what's interesting here is once this digital signature has been kind of created and enacted, the transaction itself becomes immutable thanks to something called a hash. And when I think about a hash, I often use the analogy of an aglet. And for those of you on the phone who know what it is, great. For those of you who don't, an aglet is actually the little piece of plastic that is at the end of your shoelace, right? That makes sure that you can actually tie your shoes and you can get that lace through the little hole. But we don't think often about an aglet, but if you think about what we would be or how late we would be if we didn't have those things, trying to get the little shoelace through the hole, we realize that cap to the shoelace, just like a hash being a cap to a transaction or a string of transactions, is extremely important, because from there, those transactions cannot be undone. So essentially what you look at in this slide when you think about blockchain is we have a way now to exchange value that is peer-to-peer, decentralized, timestamped, and immutable. What comes to mind is a permanent record, right? And if you remember when you were in grade school, your parents told you, don't mess up. If you get detention, it goes in your permanent record. And then you get older and you realize there's no such thing as a permanent record. Well, now, for better or worse, thanks to blockchain, we do have a permanent record. And the question becomes, well, if we've got this permanent record, what do we put on it? And you can see a litany of ideas of things that will now be migrated to the blockchain, so that all of a sudden now paper-based, accounts really become less important because of the decentralized, immutable fashion or characteristics of blockchain. We can put things like medical records, financial accounts and value, deed and title of ownership. So again, probably a pretty big impact to all the title attorneys out there, birth and death certificates. Right, the idea that we have control over our data like never before becomes incredibly important as we create, as a society, more and more data. And from there, the question becomes, well, how do we protect that data? And blockchain will play a role here as well. But this really brings into this conversation the third part of what we think is so important going forward, and that's really cybersecurity. And we think about cybersecurity and data in the past. Well, we used an analogy around a castle, and that we had all of our data in the castle, and we wanted encryption or keys to access that. We wanted to control who was going in or out, and we wanted authentication that the right person was going in, and we had a list of the bad actors and the anti-malware. But the question becomes, as more and more of our data actually shifts to the cloud, right? So more and more of our data not being in these big server farms, but being kind of in the cloud. How do you dig a moat around a cloud? How high do castle walls have to be in a cloud? So now all of a sudden we're protecting data using things like peer-to-peer encryption, right? Making sure that people who have the data are supposed to have that data, and it's encrypted from point to point. Thanks to artificial intelligence, we're using things like behavioral biometrics. Computers who are AI or that are AI enabled now have a better idea of who's sitting down at the terminal, right? The way I type is going to be very different than the way Brian types. I probably make the same mistakes over and over. He probably types faster and better than I do. So the computer can discern whether or not the right person is actually sitting at the computer, thanks to things like behavioral biometrics. Multi-factor authentication, we'll talk about that in a little while. And even a better idea of exit and entry points and nodes around who's actually accessing this data. And we know that cybersecurity is so important because it's so expensive, right? You think about, cybersecurity attacks you read about in the news, oftentimes those attacks that you're hearing about today happened almost a year ago. In fact, it takes about 206 days to identify a data breach. It's costing the average company about $18 million. And if you look at all the cybercrime potential or what kind of data and cost at risk, we're talking about a global dollar amount of $5.2 trillion. So it is a very big deal. And when we think about AI and blockchain and cybersecurity, right, we think these are the things that are going to be impacting us, again, both personally and professionally for years to come. So now that we've kind of identified those kind of three key technology disruptions, let's now talk a little bit about the future of finance and where we're seeing these things used on a daily basis. And right out of the gate, we think about machines being trained to make trading and investment decisions. And you might think, well, machines have already done that, right? We've got quant analytics. And I would say you're not wrong in that respect, but artificial intelligence used to find and actually execute on new ideas, that's what's new, right? Go back to the analogy we used in the game of Go, where AlphaGo as a program was playing moves that only had a chance of 1 in 10,000 being played by a human. AI is now being used to find that 1 in 10,000 investment opportunity, or that 1 in 10,000 line in the 10K report that's going to be critical to investment going forward. So, what are some examples of how we're using AI even today at Capital Group or American Funds? We're using AI to help us do cognitive search, right? We've been managing other people's money for over almost 90 years. Right? You create a lot of data, and with offices all over the world, that data can be dispersed and disparate. We've taken huge steps to bring all that data into a searchable cognitive database so that all of our analysts today can stand on the shoulders of all the great analysts that came before. We're using robo-analysts to read things like 10K and 10Q, trade optimization, fund board reporting, geo-targeting. Now, I know we're not going to conferences much, but thanks to geo-targeting using AI and the geolocator on your smartphone, we know who's coming in and out of our sessions. We can actually say to someone, hey, you're only 10 feet away from the best session on target dates you've ever seen. Come this way. The amount of data that's floating around and how we actually make sense of that data is where AI becomes incredibly important. Fraud detection, virtual wholesaling assistance, lead scoring, customer segmentation. These are all ways that we at American Funds, and I would guess a lot of other asset managers, are using AI to our clients' benefit. How about things like blockchain? Now, not necessarily here at American Funds, but where are we seeing blockchain in the financial services industry more broadly? Well, just raising capital. In the past, if a company wanted to go public, they would have to do an IPO or initial public offering of stock. However, now they can do an ICO or initial coin offering, where they're kind of circumventing the traditional stock market and raising capital through these kind of digital tokens. We're seeing clearing and settlement. Again, if you think about the attributes of blockchain, right, if there are transactions that are decentralized, that are immutable, right now all of a sudden, T+2 goes to T+0. So you've got instantaneous clearing and settlement. Smart contracts and trade execution, right? You think of limit orders. If I wanted to put in a limit order to buy or sell, I have to find a brokerage house to do that, a trader to execute. But if we're doing that on the blockchain, again, peer-to-peer, that can be done instantaneously. And even things like proxy voting and compliance accounting, we think will migrate to the blockchain. And now cybersecurity, right? We know that your data and your client's data is incredibly important. And in fact, 83% of registered investment advisors say cybersecurity is the number one compliance concern they have, and it's been that way for 6 years in a row, right? So that said, we've got to make sure that we have our eyes on the prize, creating data sets that are secure, again, for our data as well as yours. And just a quick example of how some of these people or some of these kind of bad actors are actually infiltrating. You see some ideas here around well disguised. You might have capital spelled wrong or a different way. But really what it gets down to, and probably what's most important, is how we are creating that culture of cyber awareness. And just to highlight a couple of them, we actually, as Capital Associates, get hacked on a quarterly basis internally. We have our own emerging technology team trying to guess our passwords using complex algorithms, and you get one of two emails. Either, hey, we were able to crack your password, you need to change it, or we weren't able to crack your password, but you still need to change it, right? That seems to be the conundrum of passwords these days, right? We're using two-factor authentication. So I can't even look at my 401k account balance without putting in my email address, my password, and then getting a push notification to my phone to make sure it was actually me. And then using a VPN, I think as most of us have migrated to working from home, this idea of a virtual private network has become critical. The idea that I could go to a Starbucks or Panera and use the public Wi-Fi, that was a haven for bad actors looking to skim data. And to the extent that we're using a VPN either furnished by our home office or one that we buy on our own, we think VPNs are incredibly important going forward. So, now that we've talked a little bit about how those things are manifesting in financial services, let's move to what's important to you, right? The role of the advisor going forward, of this holographic advisor. And we're not saying that you need to or don't need to be in front of clients, right? But I think we've all got more and more comfortable with the idea of impacting lives from afar. And when we think about this, impacting lives, the bedrock or the foundational question to financial planning is this: how long do you think you'll live? Right? If we know the answer to this question, then all of a sudden retirement planning or legacy planning becomes very easy. We know exactly how much insurance we need. But now all of a sudden, without the foresight or the knowledge of when you will actually die, and a lot of us, I think myself, would agree it's good that we don't know that, we start playing the numbers. We start using kind of averages. And we ask, if a client comes into your office today and says, I want a financial plan that brings me to age 70, do you think that's a good plan? Well, probably not, right? Because we know that the average person is going to live much longer than 70 years, right? 65-year-old couple, 50% chance one lives to 92, the other lives to 97, mostly the females. So a 70-year plan is no good. An 80-year plan is obviously no good either. So now all of a sudden, are we getting into 100 or 120-year plans? But for some of our younger millennials, all of a sudden 120 might not be so far off. And unfortunately, I skipped right past the 100, and I'll go back for a sec. And not for a show of hands because I can't see them, but how many of us remember the Willard Scott Smucker's Jam 100-Year Club, right? Where a woman, most often than not, from Kansas City, Missouri, named Ethel, would write a letter in, and Willard Scott would wish her a happy birthday. Now, for better or worse, we've got so many people turning 100 that they don't read your name on TV anymore. In fact, I went out and I tried it, right? I told a little white lie. I said that I had turned 100. And I got an email generated from Al Roker or from Al Roker's team saying, congratulations on turning 100. Obviously, we can't read all the names we get on the air, so please accept this digital badge to share with friends and family on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So now 100 doesn't even get your name on the news. So again, all of a sudden, when we're going to something like 120, wow, we've got to do a pretty good job of hiring the right people if they're going to be working with us for potentially the next 50 or 60 years. And that really begs the question of how are HR teams starting to use some of this technology, and where are you likely to see some of this technology as you're talking with plan sponsors and participants? Well, right out of the gate, smart hiring. More and more employers are using artificial intelligence to craft effective and inclusive job postings, right? And this is one where I had to dig a little bit deeper because I wasn't 100% sure what they meant, but what they found was that when one person writes a job posting, what they do is, unfortunately or fortunately, they write that job posting through their lens. And what they unfortunately do is miss a huge segment of the population that might be ideal for the job, not on purpose or out of malice, but what they're using AI to do is to craft new job postings. And what they're finding is that when AI is being used, they're getting many more applicants than they would have in the past. They're also using chatbots to reach, converse, and screen candidates. And we're hearing this more and more, where someone has a job interview and the first interview isn't actually with a human. It's over the phone with a camera on you, so over the internet using AI. And this kind of quasi-HR digital executive asks you questions, and then based on not only your verbal responses, but what you're doing with your face as far as micro expressions are also being graded. So you could say all the right things, but if you're looking up and to the left and the computer thinks that's synonymous with lying, you might not even make it to the next round. And then they're doing what they call big data scrubs of social media to find what we call right fit meta profiles. And so the idea that everything you've ever put on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, now that you're a candidate for that job, all of that is fair game. And they can go back and say, all right, this person told us X, Y, and Z. Let's go back and see if that really actually lines up. Is the person we're hiring from 9 to 5 also a good person from 5 to 9? And for better or worse, all that data has been volunteered by what you put on, again, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. So now once you've gotten the job, hopefully, how are they using HR? How's HR using AI in the daily workflow? Well, data aggregation of health and retirement, right? There's no doubt that there are huge cost overruns and mismanagement, again, not malicious, but the data around healthcare and cost and retirement, where we're finding that there are huge gaps. And when we have huge gaps, thanks to huge amounts of data, AI can help go through that data and find the inconsistencies and the opportunities, again, back to that 1 in 10,000 opportunity, that we might have missed as humans to really clean up both the healthcare cost and the retirement allocations. Blockchain-based employment records, storage, sharing, what we call private key encryption, facial recognition for enrollment and authentication. So you think about your first day on the job, you have to enroll in your benefits, and you're not writing your social security number anymore. You're using your face to enroll in your benefits. And then for all of you as advisors who are dealing with kind of the C-suite, understand that there are some new additions. Right? We know who the COO is, we know who the CFO is, but how about the CAIO, right? The Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer, or the CDAO, the Chief Data Aggregation Officer? Right? Understand what these roles are and how they're impacting the decisions around things like retirement and whether or not you'll actually be the advisor of choice for that particular plan. So from here, how is this technology impacting the employees? Well, it's no doubt. Automation is making it so that employees can work and live longer, right? It used to be that if you were a bricklayer or you ran a jackhammer, you had a very short life because it would really beat you up. But now these tools are automated and they're telling, hey, they're telling the operators, you're not at the right angle. You've been on this tool too long. It's time to take a break. right? And it's letting us, again, work and live longer. And then when we transition from that job, we have this new thing called the gig economy. So I can retire from one job, right, because maybe I'm physically beat up, and then I can go into driving a car for, Uber or Lyft, right? Smarter digital consumption, right? Helping us make better choices. Perfect example, there's a company called EvoShare where I can link my debit card and all of the excess that I would save through their portal now goes into my 401k plan. And these are great ways to use technology to help us actually increase or kind of promote these positive retirement outcomes. We've got virtual digital collaboration, which I think we're all doing right now as a function of me talking to you. We're doing virtual digital collaboration. Wellness apps that are helping to lower healthcare costs and chatbots to answer retirement questions. Employees, again, as a function of all of us being home, are really taking advantage of this technology. So from here, where are you going to see this as an advisor? Well, number one, AI portfolio construction. We're not saying that you have to take your hand off the wheel, but what we are saying is that when it comes to things like research, investments, allocation, these decisions can be aided, not supplanted, but aided by artificial intelligence. We think about blockchain as a meaningful alternative, especially in the back office when we think about all the data that we're working with and all the restrictions around sharing that data. Now, all of a sudden, blockchain can really help us kind of close the gaps as it comes to data privacy. And then cybersecurity is a fiduciary duty. And this is something that I think a lot of you have seen more and more about. As a fiduciary, the plan sponsor has an embedded, we'll call it responsibility to make sure that that data is protected. And to the extent you help them understand that, we think you'll continue to be the advisor of choice going forward. So as we round out, what can you do right now? Well, number one, turn on two-factor authentication for not only your employees, but yourself, for your family. Two-factor authentication, whether that's a thumbprint or facial recognition. One of the best ways to stop cyber hacking is that two-factor authentication. When you think about your practice, start integrating some of what the Department of Labor and the Employee Benefit Security Administration has to say on cybersecurity as a fiduciary duty. Some great pieces out there by the DOL and the EBSA, also pieces that we've penned that kind of incorporate a lot of that material. Really bone up and start to add that to your value proposition. Create or locate your firm's SIRP or your cyber incident reporting plan. It's this idea that there are two kinds of companies, those who have been compromised and those who will be. When we see these big hacks and these big attacks, and then all of a sudden the CEO comes out with a message to all of the company's clients, that message wasn't crafted the morning they found out. That's something that they've had on file and that they can speak to at the drop of a hat. Understand what that is. And whether you use it for your practice or you employ your clients to use it, understand what a SIRP is and how to write one. And then finally, understand digital wallets here, right? Especially as the younger generation migrates to things like crypto assets. When we start to say, hey, you need to put more into your 401k or into your HSA, and they say, hey, I'd love to, but it's all going into my Coinbase account so I can buy more, Litecoin or Ripple or Zcash. That's fine. We have to understand what that is if we're going to have an intelligent conversation around it and why, more of that money needs to be allocated to retirement. And then what you'll do going forward. So kind of down the line, we're going to see more and more of us using AI for prospecting, research, and mass personalization. We're going to see private labeling of chatbots, right? So whether it's Bank of America with Erica or Siri or Alexa, don't be surprised if in the years to come, each of you for your own practice have a private or a white label chatbot that you can deploy to your clients. Be ready to discuss crypto assets in an IPS. And this is not us advocating that you have something like Bitcoin as an investment in your 401k, but as the face and the age of the investment committee changes and questions come up around why don't we have cryptocurrency in our 401k, you need to be ready to articulate why that's probably not such a good idea. And then to the extent you're working with providers who hang their hat on tech capabilities, whether it's American Funds and all the things that we just showed you that we're doing, or any number of other kind of service providers, to the extent they have certifications on security or statements of service as it relates to cybersecurity, be sure to share that with your prospects and say, hey, we only do business with clients and providers who share our thoughts and our kind of importance as it relates to data protection. And I'll end with this. In summary, technology, there is a disruption. It's not here to disintermediate you from your practice. It's here to empower you. This future of finance, the best firms are the one embracing the opportunity. And to do that, and when you do that, you're adding more value than ever before. And then finally, as the advisor, employers and employees alike, they value your forward thinking. For all things financial service related, whether it's technologically slanted or not, you are the smartest person that they're dealing with, and they look to you for ideas on how to take advantage. And then finally, I think this quote probably says it all from former U.S. Army Chief of Staff Eric Shinseki. If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. Right? As much as some of us probably don't want to hear this, we are not stopping this technological wave. In fact, probably the best thing we can do is to make sure that we're taking the best of this technological wave and putting it to work for the people that matter most to us, our friends, our families, and to our clients. So with that, I just want to turn it back over to Brian and say thank you all for your time and attention today, for the business that you put with American Funds in the past and the business that we really hope to earn going forward in the future.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate the insight and the backdrop there. I think that's a good, at the very least, a primer for everyone on the phone. We'll stick around for a few minutes of questions. If you have those, please enter those in the questions panel now. I see some that have come in already, Ryan. They seem to revolve mainly around maybe more specific application of some of what you've talked about. For one, have you worked with any advisors that you would consider kind of cutting edge in any of these areas, and have any anecdotes you can share about specifically what they've done to implement some of this in their practice? I mean, obviously, some of the things you mentioned might be cost or infrastructure prohibitive for some folks on the phone. So maybe kind of bringing that back to the ground level for a small to medium-sized firm and what they might be able to do today.
Sure. I think really right out of the gate, one of the first things that I noticed some key advisors doing is getting out to their clients specifically and trying to help the clients understand that cybersecurity in particular is very important to us. So what they started to do was really leverage the resources that they had. There's a lot of folks out there that are brought to you by asset managers like us to really help educate clients. Because even though, I mean, you think about financial services, our stock and trade, there are a lot of stopgaps and a lot of ways that our home offices make sure that we're not running afoul from a security standpoint. But to the average person, a lot of the things we just discussed are not as, we'll say, prominent or understandable. So I think some of the best advisors are kind of out there reaching out to their we'll call it, whether it's employers or the employees or even the private wealth clients, saying, hey, this is something that you need to know about. So it's educating clients, right? Letting them know that, hey, this is something that is important to us and should be important to you. And then giving them ideas, not necessarily a sales pitch, but, what are some of the things they can be doing beyond just two-factor authentication, right? There are a lot of services out there, like password protectors, right? LastPass is one of them, things like LifeLock. You'd hate for a client to ever call you up and say, hey, I was checking my account and it's, $40,000 light. What happened? We all need, it's not that we want to, we need smarter end user clients. So we see a lot of the good advisors out there educating first and foremost, not necessarily looking for the sale, but that old mantra of an educated customer is our best client. Trying to make their client base aware twofold: how important it is to you as the advisor and how important it should be to them as the client. So it's really a campaign of awareness. And then you saw it earlier. It's also internally creating this culture of accountability. It's no secret, 90% plus of all the breaches that have ever happened were due to human error. So what we see is that more and more advisors are taking it upon themselves to get training for their particular office. A lot of public resources out there. University of Central Florida posts some great material on what you can do as a small business, and it's free for anybody who goes to the website. So I think it's a long-winded answer. It's education and training both in the four walls of your practice and for your clients.
Thanks, Ryan. So probably doubling down on what you just said, but just want to make sure we address it, is you mentioned cybersecurity as a number one concern of advisors. Is visiting that University of Central Florida website a good place to start if someone on the phone wants to make sure they're positioning their practice as securely as they can? What's kind of the low-hanging fruit there?
And if it's helpful, Brian, and I can go ahead and send you that email link. It's not an endorsement by American Funds by any stretch, but just some really good material. And I had the pleasure of presenting alongside of the founder of that group. Again, it's a public institution, nonprofit. I can go ahead and send you that information. And if you want to share it with everybody on the phone, that's a great first step. And then again, I also have a piece that we wrote at American Funds that talks about cybersecurity as a fiduciary liability. And then, also what we call NIST, the National Institute of Standard and Technologies. What they've done is posted, hey, this is what a good kind of cybersecurity policy looks like. We can get you that for everybody as well.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be helpful. We can certainly include that in the follow-up that we send out to everyone who's on the line today. So with that, I think that does it. Thank you, Ryan and Capital Group, and thank you to everyone on the phone who joined us for this webinar. As a reminder, as I just mentioned, we will send out the slides along with the recording and the pieces that Ryan mentioned. And most importantly, we wish you safety and health and as you support your families, colleagues, and clients. And please don't hesitate to contact us if there's anything we at Epic can do to support you. So thank you all and have a great evening.